If you don't like living with us, then leave. Those were the words my daughter-in-law spat at me, sharp enough to slice through the air and lodge themselves in my chest. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. But her eyes, cold narrowed, told me I hadn't. Leave? From my own house? The walls around me seemed to close in, the same walls I had painted, cleaned, and paid for with every sacrifice of my life. Yet somehow, standing there in my own kitchen, I felt like a stranger. I didn't answer her. My tongue refused to move, as if it knew anything I said would only make things worse. She stood across from me with her arms folded, chin lifted, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. My son wasn't there to hear it. He was always conveniently absent when her cruelty slipped through. Inside, my mind screamed questions. How did I end up here? How did I become an unwanted guest in the very home I built? I wanted to remind her whose name was on the deed. I wanted to shout that I had given her a roof when she and my son had nowhere else to go. But instead, silence spilled out of me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the deep, bone-tired exhaustion of a woman who had carried too much for too long. She tapped her nails against the counter, the sound echoing like a clock counting down my dignity. Well, she pressed, if it's that uncomfortable for you, the door is right there. Her words were honeyed with sarcasm, but her eyes burned with something darker. She wanted me gone. I forced a weak smile, the kind that hides a wound too raw to show. I told myself not to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Still, my heart thudded painfully against my ribs, every beat reminding me of the truth I didn't want to admit. This was no longer my home. It was theirs. As I turned away from her, my eyes landed on the dining table. Once it had been a place of laughter. Family dinners, birthdays, late-night talks with my son when he was a boy. Now it was covered with their things, her scented candles, her fancy placemats, her clutter. Little by little, my world had been replaced by hers, until I was left with almost nothing. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and held my hands together to stop them from trembling. The silence felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I asked myself the question that wouldn't leave me. When did I lose my voice? I remembered the day they moved in. My son had called, his voice rushed, telling me it would only be temporary. They just needed a little time to save money, he'd said. I welcomed them with open arms. After all, what mother wouldn't want to help her child? But temporary stretched into months. Then months turned into years. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being the owner of the house. I became an intruder. That night I lay awake, her words replaying again and again. If you don't like living with us, then leave. I pressed my pillow against my face, trying to muffle the sobs that escaped without my permission. I didn't want her to hear me cry. I didn't want to give her that power. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted forever. This wasn't just about a cruel comment. It was about control. About power. About the quiet, steady erasing of everything I had worked for. I should have seen it earlier. The way she arranged the furniture without asking. The way she dismissed my cooking as old-fashioned. The way she corrected me in front of my son as if I were a child. Each moment had been a warning. Each moment had chipped away at my place in my own home. And now the mask had slipped completely. As dawn crept through the curtains, I sat upright, my hands clenched tight in my lap. My heart was raw, but a new kind of fire sparked beneath the pain. She thought I was powerless. She thought I would stay quiet forever. But she didn't know me. Not yet. Because that night was only the beginning. And I was about to learn just how far she was willing to go to push me out of the life I had built with my own hands. I should have known this was only the beginning. When my son called, his voice was desperate. That's how it began. His words came rushed, tangled with worry, like he was drowning and reaching for me to pull him out. Mom, it's just until we get back on our feet. You won't even notice us. I didn't think twice. Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? He was my only child, the boy I had raised with everything I had. If opening my doors meant saving him from hardship, then my peace could wait. At first, the house felt alive again. Their laughter filled the rooms, their footsteps echoed on the stairs. I cooked dinners for 3 instead of 1, setting extra plates on the table, pretending the warmth of family had returned. For a brief moment it felt good not to eat alone. But slowly little cracks began to show. They arrived with more boxes than I expected. Suitcases stacked in the hallway, shoes cluttered by the door, bags spilling into corners I'd always kept neat. My cozy, ordered home began to shrink. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary. That word became my shield against the unease gnawing at me. At dinner one evening, my son squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom. You've saved us." His smile was tired, worn thin by stress, but I held on to it. I wanted to believe it was worth it. His wife, though, never looked at me the same way. Her glances were sharp, quick, like she was measuring me against some invisible scale and finding me lacking. When I set a steaming pot of stew on the table, she forced a polite smile. "Oh, thanks. I'll just have a little." "It's heavy," she said, heavy like it was an insult. The argument started soon after. At night, muffled voices rose behind their closed door. Sometimes it was shouting, sometimes cold silence that lingered into the morning. I pretended not to hear. It wasn't my place to ask. But each outburst rattled the peace of my walls, turning my home into something unfamiliar. My favorite spaces began to vanish too. The armchair by the window where I'd spent years reading, knitting, or simply watching the seasons change, was suddenly buried under their throw blankets and phone chargers. The kitchen counters, once spotless, overflowed with their gadgets and mugs. Even the air smelled different, her perfume, her candles erasing the scent of my home. Still I kept quiet. I told myself I was helping, that this was love, that it was my duty as a mother. But the silence pressed heavier with each passing week. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and froze. She was sitting in my chair, the one place in the house that had always been mine. She didn't ask, didn't hesitate. She just crossed her legs and leaned back as if she belonged there more than I ever did. When she caught me staring, she smiled, casual and sweet, but her words cut me sharper than any glare. "It looks better if I sit here." My breath caught, and for the first time I wondered, was I losing more than just space? Was I losing myself? I woke up one morning to the sound of clattering in the kitchen. At first I thought it was nothing, just the usual noise of breakfast. But when I stepped inside, my heart sank. Everything was different. The cups were no longer in the cabinet above the sink where I'd kept them for years. The spices I reached for daily had been shoved to the back of a different shelf. Even my cast iron pan, blackened with decades of use, was gone from its hook. In its place hung her shiny store-bought pans, still gleaming like they'd never known real work. I stood there, frozen, clutching the doorway. It felt like walking into a stranger's house. She turned when she noticed me, a bright smile plastered on her face. "Oh, good morning. I thought I'd tidy things up. It's easier this way." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes sparkled with something sharper. I tried to steady my breathing. "Could you please not move my things?" My voice came out softer than I intended, almost pleading. Her smile faltered for a split second, then returned, colder this time. "We just want the place to feel like a home." A home. The word stung, as if it hadn't been one already, as if the years of meals, birthdays, and love lived inside these walls counted for nothing. I wanted to shout that it was my home, that she was only here because of me. But my son walked in just then, rubbing his eyes, and I bit my tongue. "Breakfast ready?" he asked her, kissing her cheek before even glancing at me. She handed him a plate like a dutiful wife, beaming with pride, while I stood off to the side, invisible. As the days passed, the changes kept coming. My lace curtains were replaced with her modern blinds. The framed family photos I had hung so carefully were taken down and replaced with abstract prints she claimed brightened the space. Even the tablecloth I loved, the one I'd stitched with my own hands, was folded away and swapped for her glossy runner. It wasn't just things. It was me. When I cooked, she wrinkled her nose. "It's too greasy. It's too salty. It's too old-fashioned." She said the words lightly, like a joke, but each one chipped away at me until I no longer recognized the woman staring back at me in the kitchen window's reflection. I found myself asking permission in my own house. Could I use the oven? Could I sit in the living room? Could I watch my shows without changing the channel for her? Every question swallowed a piece of my dignity. At night I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of their laughter from the living room. Laughter that no longer included me. I felt erased, as if I had been gently pushed out of every corner, every moment, until I was nothing more than a shadow haunting the rooms I once filled with life. One evening, I gathered the courage to speak again. We were in the kitchen and I quietly said, I'd appreciate it if you didn't move things around without asking. This has been my system for years. Before she could answer, my son looked up from his phone. His voice was tired, clipped. Mom, can't you just adapt? I blinked, stunned. He didn't even look at me when he said it. She smirked, satisfied, and slipped an arm around his waist. In that moment, the truth hit me harder than her words ever could. My son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, wasn't on my side anymore. And that was the cruelest cut of all. She's too old-fashioned, she's in the way. I heard the words through the thin walls late at night, whispered between my son and his wife as if I couldn't possibly still be awake. My chest tightened, my hands clutched the blanket, and I forced myself to stay silent. It wasn't the first time I had overheard them, but each time the sting cut deeper. By day, the silence was louder than any argument. At meals, they sat across from me, talking only to each other, their laughter bouncing back and forth like I wasn't even there. When I tried to join in, my words dangled in the air, ignored until I learned to keep my mouth shut. The food became another battleground. I cooked one evening, setting the table the way I always had, bowls of stew, fresh bread, a sprinkle of salt just the way my son used to love it. But the moment she took a bite, she set her spoon down with a faint clink. "We don't eat so much salt," she said lightly, glancing at me with that polished smile that always hit her bite. Then with a tilt of her head she added, "Maybe you shouldn't either at your age." Her words hung in the air, sharper than the edge of a knife. My son chuckled under his breath, not cruelly, but in that careless way that told me he wouldn't defend me either. I felt the heat rise in my face, a wave of shame that made me want to disappear into the walls. I excused myself, claiming I wasn't hungry, though my stomach growled with emptiness. In my room I sat in the dark, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. That shame was changing into something else now, anger. Quiet, steady anger that burned hotter each day. I told myself to wait, to watch, to listen. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not yet. But the house I had built with love had turned into a battlefield where the wounds weren't on my skin but carved into my heart. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every whispered insult in the night. It all piled up, brick by brick, until I felt walled off in my own life. Then one afternoon as I folded laundry, I went to put away my son's shirts in their room. That's when I saw it. A glossy brochure peeking out from under a stack of magazines. I pulled it free, my breath catching in my throat. A real estate brochure. Pages marked, circled, as if someone had been carefully studying them. My hands trembled as I flipped through. New houses. Modern layouts. Perfect for starting fresh. Fresh. Were they planning something I didn't know about? "Welcome to our home." The words hit me like a slap. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching my daughter-in-law sweep open the front door with a dazzling smile. Guests streamed in, arms full of wine bottles and desserts, chattering cheerfully as if this house had always been hers. No one had told me. No one had asked. It was my house, my living room, my dining table. Yet I hadn't even known a gathering was happening until I heard the laughter spilling through the walls. I tried to steady myself as I walked toward the living room, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt invisible. She was everywhere, fluttering from guest to guest, introducing them, guiding them around the house like a queen leading a tour of her castle. My son followed behind her, smiling, nodding, his arm draped over her shoulder. When a couple asked how long they had lived here, she answered smoothly, "Oh, just over a year now. We've really made it our own." Made it their own. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to shout that it was my house, my sweat, my years of sacrifice that built these walls. But the words stuck in my chest like stones. I tried to join the conversations, but no one really looked at me. One woman even mistook me for a relative visiting from out of town. "So nice of you to stay here with them," she said kindly, as if I were some guest tucked into the corner. The shame was unbearable. Everywhere I looked, pieces of me had been erased. My lace curtains replaced. My framed photos gone. Even my dishes, replaced with her glossy set, clinked against the table as though mocking me. I sat quietly at the edge of the room, listening as the laughter grew louder, the music swelled, and my daughter-in-law floated around, soaking up admiration that should never have been hers. Then came the final blow. I heard her voice over the music, low but clear, as she leaned toward a friend. "Once we get the deed in our name, she won't be a problem anymore." My heart stopped. The room spun, voices blurred, and for the first time I understood. This wasn't just about respect. It wasn't just about me feeling erased. They had a plan, and I was the obstacle standing in their way. My body trembled with rage. Her words from the night before echoed in my mind like a poison I couldn't spit out. Once we get the deed in our name, she won't be a problem anymore. So that was their plan. Not just to push me aside. Not just to silence me. They wanted my house. The one I had built with my bare hands and a lifetime of sacrifice. I spent the morning pacing my room, torn between two voices. One told me to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to pretend I hadn't heard. The other, fiercer, told me I had been silent for too long. By evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. My son was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone. I sat across from him, my hands clenched to keep them from shaking. Is this true? I asked, my voice raw. You want my house? He froze, his thumb hovering above the screen. For a long moment he didn't look at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tired, almost rehearsed. It's better for everyone this way. Everyone. The word sliced me open. He couldn't even look me in the eyes. I stared at him, waiting for the boy I raised to fight against those words, to tell me it was a mistake, that I had misunderstood. But he didn't. He just sank deeper into his chair, shoulders slumped, as if my pain was an inconvenience he wanted to avoid. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult his wife had ever thrown. This was my son. The child I carried, fed, clothed, sacrificed for. The boy I stayed awake for on sick nights. The young man I cheered for at every milestone. And now, he wanted to erase me from the very life I had built for him. I swallowed hard, the taste of bitterness rising in my throat. That night I said nothing more. I let him walk away, let her smirk at me when she passed by, certain I was beaten. But they didn't know me. They thought I was powerless. They forgot whose name was on the papers. So the next morning when the house was empty, I slipped my coat on and walked out the door. My hands still trembled, but not from fear anymore. This time it was resolve. I headed straight to my lawyer. I moved through the house like a shadow, quiet, unnoticed. On the surface I seemed the same, silent, passive, letting them believe they had won. But behind closed doors I was working. Every night, when they were asleep, I opened my old lockbox and gathered the papers they had clearly forgotten about. The deed, the mortgage receipts long paid off, the utility bills in my name. Proof carved in ink and time that this house was mine. At the lawyer's office I laid the documents across his polished desk, my hands steadier than they had been in weeks. He scanned each page, nodding, his brow firm with certainty. Finally, he looked up at me and said the words that lit a spark in my chest. They have no legal claim. You hold all the power. For the first time in months I breathed deeply, freely. The weight pressing on my chest began to lift. Power. I hadn't felt it in so long, but now it pulsed inside me, warm and steady. I walked home with a new strength in my step, though I kept it hidden. At dinner, I let her criticize my cooking again. I let my son avoid my gaze. I let them think I was too small, too weak to fight. But inside a storm was gathering. They didn't know the papers were already secured, the lawyer already preparing the safeguards I needed. They didn't know I had shifted from victim to strategist. One evening as I cleared the plates, she leaned back in my chair, the one she had claimed as her own, and smirked. Her words came out sharp and familiar. If you don't like living here, then leave. This time I didn't flinch. I simply turned my face away so she couldn't see the smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Because soon, very soon, it wouldn't be me leaving. It would be them. You need to leave. Both of you. Immediately. The words slipped from my mouth, calm and steady, but the silence that followed was deafening. My son's fork clattered against his plate. My daughter-in-law's smile froze, her eyes narrowing as if she hadn't heard me right. What did you just say? She hissed. I stood tall, my hands no longer trembling. You told me to leave my own home. But it's you who will pack your bags. Her chair screeched against the floor as she shot to her feet. How dare you? After everything we've done for this place. I cut her off. This place? This house is mine. It always has been. Every brick, every board, every inch of it carries my name, not yours. Her face twisted, rage spilling out in sharp words. You're ungrateful. Selfish. Do you think anyone would put up with you if not for us? My son rose slowly, his eyes darting between us. Mom, please. Don't do this. We're family. We just need more time. Time. I asked, my voice breaking for the first time. I gave you my time. I gave you my roof, my food, my peace. And you gave me nothing but shame in return. He dropped his gaze, unable to answer. That silence cut deeper than her insults. My own son, my flesh and blood, wouldn't stand for me. She lunged forward, slamming her hands on the table. We're not leaving. Yes, you are, I said firmly, sliding the folded documents across the table. The deed, the proof, the unshakable truth. The law says so. My lawyer says so. And I say so. For a moment their faces crumbled. Shock, disbelief, desperation. She turned to him, whispering furiously, but he only shook his head, defeated. The argument exploded after that, her voice shrieking, his voice begging, my voice steady like stone. Every insult, every plea bounced off me because I had already made my choice. Finally, with a guttural scream, she stormed off to their room, slamming doors and throwing things into suitcases. My son lingered in the doorway, his eyes red, but he said nothing. Not an apology. Not a goodbye. As they dragged their bags through the front door, she spun back toward me, her eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Then the door slammed. And for the first time in months the house was silent. A heavy, aching silence. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the walls I had built, and felt both triumph and heartbreak wash over me. I had won. But at what cost? The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the tense silence of resentment that used to hang in the air, but a softer kind, calm, weightless. My house, my sanctuary, was finally mine again. For the first time in months, I could walk from room to room without feeling like an intruder. No slam doors. No footsteps echoing with contempt. No voice telling me I should leave if I didn't like it. Only quiet, and the sound of my own steady breathing. I stood in the middle of the living room, the same place where I'd once been made invisible, and stretched my arms wide. The air seemed fresher. Even the walls felt warmer, like they'd been waiting for me to reclaim them. Of course, peace didn't erase the ache in my chest. My son was gone, not physically but in a way that mattered more. The little boy I had raised, the one who used to run into my arms after school, had grown into a man who chose silence over loyalty. That betrayal didn't vanish with their departure, it lingered. Some wounds don't heal overnight. Still, I reminded myself, the cost of keeping him close under her influence would have been my very soul. And that was too high a price to pay. A few days later, my friend Clara stopped by with a warm loaf of bread and a hug that lasted longer than I expected. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning my face. You look lighter, she said softly. Like you can finally breathe. I can, I admitted. But it hurts too. I never thought my own son would. My voice cracked before I could finish. Clara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You didn't lose your son, she said. He lost his way. And maybe one day he'll find it back to you. But don't punish yourself for the choices he's making now. Her words hit deep, loosening a knot I'd been carrying in my chest. For so long I had blamed myself, wondering if I had been too strict, too lenient, too something. But Clara was right. His choices were his. Mine was to finally stand up for myself. That night, as I walked through my quiet home, I began reclaiming it piece by piece. I took down the framed photographs that Dil had shoved into boxes and placed my own family pictures back on the walls. I rearranged the living room furniture the way I liked it, not the way she insisted it should be. I even planted fresh flowers in the garden, their colors defiant against the memory of all that had been taken from me. Each small act felt like stitching myself back together. And yet, when I lay down to sleep, there was still a question echoing in my mind. Would my son ever come back? Would he ever see me not as the obstacle she painted me to be, but as the mother who had loved him with every piece of herself? I didn't know, and maybe I never would. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized something important. My worth was not dependent on his choices. My home, my heart, my dignity, these were mine to guard. And I had proven that no one, not even my own family, could erase me without my permission. The house creaked softly in the night, but instead of dread, I felt comfort. It was alive again, breathing with me, no longer suffocating under their weight. I closed my eyes and whispered the truth I had fought so hard to remember. Sometimes loving yourself means refusing to be erased, even by family. And with that, I finally slept in peace. Never let anyone, not even family, strip away your dignity or claim what is rightfully yours. Your worth is not negotiable, and your home, your peace, your identity, they are yours to protect. If you believe every woman deserves respect and justice, share this story. And if you want more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe.